All right, guys, so we are so close to being done with the subjunctive and a weirdo cat. So this is going to be the last chapter that we study the subjunctive. And we've already covered a lot. We've already covered the E, which stands for emotions, the I, which stands for impersonal expressions. We looked at D, which stands for doubt. And we also looked at the T, which stands for time conjunctions. In this video, we're actually going to cover two of the different letters. We're going to look at W, which stands for wants and wishes, and the R, which stands for recommendations. We will end there on this video, and then in the next video, we'll look at C, which stands for conjunctions, not time conjunctions. We've already done those. Other types of conjunctions, just conjunctions in general. We will not have time to get to the O this year, which stands for ojalá, or for the A, which stands for adjective clauses. But let's go ahead and get started with wants and wishes for today. So I know that when we started the subjunctive, and we started talking about weirdo cat, it was just this new concept. And I know that over time you guys have struggled with a couple of the different concepts. But I hope the more and more and more that we cover the subjunctive, that something in your mind has just clicked and you've started seeing the world in a different way. A lot of learning the subjunctive is just looking at the world from a new perspective and not the way that we look at it when we're speaking in English. So as we go into wants and wishes and then recommendations here, hopefully you're starting to see some patterns with the subjunctive. So with wants and wishes, the W in weirdo cat, we will use the subjunctive whenever one person wants another person to do some action, which it completely makes sense that we would use the subjunctive for this, because if I want you to do something, the actions that I want you to do I have any control over those actions? I don't, right? I can want you to do those things, but it doesn't mean that you're going to do those things. So what tense do I put those actions in that haven't been done yet? Well, I can't really put them in the present tense, as we've discussed before, because they're not happening now. I can't put them in the past because they didn't happen. And I really shouldn't even put them in the future because I don't know that they're going to happen. And so we use the subjunctive tense whenever we're describing what we want another person to do. And we use a really similar model to what you've seen before. We have our first subject, we have our first verb of wanting in the present tense. Then we have our connecting word K, which we see a lot in the subjunctive. Then we have a new subject, so our second subject in the sentence. And then we have our second verb in the sentence. And that verb is going to get conjugated into the subjunctive tense. So an example is, yo quiero que ustedes laven los platos. This is, I want you all to wash the plates. Of course I do. I don't want to wash them, but are you all going to wash the plates? Maybe not. If I ask really nicely, maybe you will, right? I'm just expressing a want or a wish that I have here that I hope will be fulfilled. As always, we want to look at some common verbs of wanting, because if you're going to express wants and wishes in Spanish, then you kind of have to know what verbs to use to do that. So some that you're really familiar with, like querer, which is an E to IE stem changer and means to want. Desear, which is also to want or to desire. Esperar, to wish or to hope for. Pedir, it's an E to I stem changer. It means to ask for. Rogar, this is probably a new one that you haven't seen before. It's an O to UE stem changer, and it means to beg. So if you're begging someone to do some action, then you would be using the subjunctive for the second verb, that second action that you're wanting them to do. Suplicar is to ask or to plead. So again, asking someone, wanting someone to do something for you. The word in English that suplicar goes with is supplication. When we're praying, that's a word that you would use, like supplication unto the Lord. It's kind of an old English word that we don't use anymore. So it just gets translated like to ask or to plead. All right, so here's some examples for you guys, and I'll read through some of these, but really I just want you to see the pattern here, all right? So, and I've already kind of highlighted some of it. The first verb is always going to be in the present tense, so you can look through there, the green highlighted verb. So quiere, espero, deseas, quiere. They're all in the present tense. The second verb is always in the subjunctive whenever you have your two different subjects in your K, of course. So trabaje, hagan, saque, planches, all right? The second verb there in blue is always in the subjunctive, okay? Some other things that you have to have in your sentence in order for it to work and in order to even use the subjunctive for that second verb is you're going to have a K. Notice that there is a connecting word K in all of these. Also, notice how many subjects are there? There's two. So you have Elena and Marcos, right? Two different subjects, two different people. Yo and ellos. Tú and yo. Susan and two. So if you see a subject change and if you see the K and then you see a verb of wanting in the first part, like I want this, I desire this, then you're probably going to use the subjunctive for your second verb, all right? So like Elena quiere que Marcos trabaje más. Yeah, of course she does. Elena wants Marcos to work more. She wants him to work more, but does he want to work more? So trabajar ends up getting conjugated in the subjunctive as trabajé. Yo espero que ellos hagan las camas. I hope that they make the beds. I'm expressing a want here that might not be met. Tú deseas que yo saque la basura. You want me to take out the trash. Of course you do. Because you don't want to take it out. You want me to. But do I want to and will I? I use the subjunctive for the second. Now notice that when I translate all of these to English, you want me to take out the trash. Take. I just used the verb to take like I always would use the verb to take. It's being used in the present tense or like in the infinitive form. I'm not doing any special. We don't use the subjunctive for these kinds of actions, but in Spanish, we have to use a different tense than the present tense, and we have to use something other than the infinitive. Susan quiere que tú planches la ropa. Susan wants you to iron the clothes. So all of these are expressing what one person wants another person to do. Now remember that as we learn the subjunctive, we also have to be very careful that we don't just start using the subjunctive every single time we see something that looks similar to what we just learned. So just because we're expressing our wants and wishes doesn't mean that we will always use the subjunctive. Just because I use the verb querer and say yo quiero doesn't mean that I'm going to use the subjunctive, right? And maybe even if I see two different subjects or two different verbs in the sentence, doesn't mean that the second verb is always going to be in the subjunctive or that I'm going to use the subjunctive. So if there is no change of subject, okay, so if it's just the same subject throughout the whole sentence, and if there's no K, if we don't have that little connecting word in the middle of the sentence, then we're more than likely just going to use the infinitive of the verb, or we'll just use the present tense for the second verb, all right? So the first example here is an example when we do use the subjunctive. Yo quiero que tú asistas a la ceremonia. So I want you to attend the ceremony, all right? How many subjects do I have? I have two, right? Yo and two. Is there a K? Yes, there's a K. Am I expressing a want or a wish? Am I doing something that should use the subjunctive? Yeah, well, the W, wants and wishes, is in the acronym WeirdoCat, so I should use the subjunctive here. But in my second sentence, yo quiero asistir a la ceremonia. I want to attend the ceremony. Should I use the subjunctive here for that second verb? No, I shouldn't. I'm expressing a want, right? But there's not two subjects here. There's only me. And there's no K. So my second verb just gets left in the infinitive form, asistir. I don't even do anything to the end of it. The last example here, yo como pollo frito y bebo agua. So I eat fried chicken and I drink water. Only one subject, so I'm going to leave all of this in the present tense. My first verb and my second verb. And keep in mind, if I say yo como pollo frito y tú comes arroz con pollo, I still only use the present tense. I don't use the subjunctive. Even though I have two subjects here, I'm just talking about what we eat. I eat fried chicken and you eat rice with chicken. No reason to use the subjunctive. There's no K in the sentence, and there's nothing uncertain about the actions that we're doing, okay? So you have to be really careful as we learn these that you don't just start lumping everything together and thinking that you should use the subjunctive for everything. All right, so now let's transition and look at the R. The R in Weirdo Cat stands for recommendations. So whenever one person is going to recommend what they think another person should do, we're going to use the subjunctive. Recommendations are really similar to wants and wishes, right? If I want you to do something, I use the subjunctive. If I recommend that you do something, I'm also going to use the subjunctive because just because I recommend that you do a certain thing doesn't mean that you're actually going to do it. Okay, so those actions that I'm recommending are kind of just up in the air. Will they happen or will they not? Again, we use a very similar model. So we have our first subject plus our verb of recommendation in the present tense plus K plus our new subject plus our second verb in the subjunctive. So I could say, yo sugiero que ustedes obedezcan a sus padres. I suggest that you all obey your parents. And that's good advice, right? Good life advice. And you'll see that I have two different subjects, yo and ustedes. My first part of my sentence and second part are connected by K. And my first verb is in the present tense. My second verb is in the subjunctive tense. So I'm recommending that you obey your parents. Whether you do it or not is up to you. Here are a few common verbs of recommendation. So the first one, recomendar, which is an E to IE stem changer, means to recommend. Sugerir, which is a E to IE stem changer, means to suggest. And aconsejar, which means to advise. All right, and finally, I have just some examples for you showing different recommendations. So, el doctor recomienda que el jugador beba más agua. The doctor recommends that the player drinks more water. It's a recommendation that hopefully the athlete will do, but we don't know if they will or not. So we use the subjunctive for the second verb there. Ella sugiere que su hija se lave las manos. She suggests that her daughter wash her hands. Yo te aconsejo que tú hagas tus deberes. I advise you to do your chores. You can see here that the subjunctive is always used for that second verb when we have our two different subjects and the connecting word K. At least for these, whenever I do a quiz or a test with you, I won't ever, you'll just always use the subjunctive for the second verb. I'll never throw in examples or sentences where it's just the present tense. There's not too many sentences where we make recommendations where we wouldn't use the subjunctive. Whenever we make recommendations, we're usually recommending other people to do things. And so it just makes sense to pretty much always use the subjunctive for recommendations.